Good evening and welcome to the Ogden City Council meeting for July 10th, 2012. Let the roll call reflect that all council members are present, and we will now have Vice Chair Blair lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now have a moment of silence. Thank you. First on the agenda is approval of minutes. First is minutes of the work session of March 21st, 2012. Councilmember Gochner.
Thank you. I have reviewed those minutes and found them to be accurate.
And the minutes of the regular meeting of May 1st, 2012. Councilmember Heyer.
Yes, Chair, I also have reviewed those minutes, found them to be a representation of that meeting. And with that, I would move that we would accept those minutes into the public record.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Heyer and a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier to approve the minutes of 4A and B. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. These minutes are approved. Next is a special recognition, and at this time we'd like to invite Walt Baker to come up to the podium. This is recognition of the city by the Water Quality Board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the City Council. It is a distinct privilege for me to be here tonight representing the Governor of the State of Utah, Gary Herbert, and the Water Quality Board to recognize an immense contribution to water quality that Ogden City has done regarding the Ogden River Restoration Project. I'm here to present the Calvin K. Sudwicks Award to the city. This award is named after Calvin K. Sudwicks, who was the second director of the Division of Water Quality and executive secretary to the Water Quality Board, serving in that capacity for some 35 years, and who was instrumental in bringing to pass many of the water quality improvements that we benefit today from. I'd like to recognize not only the City Council, but the Mayor and all those in Ogden City who have had a hand in this, and would like to read the citation that the Water Quality Board has provided in conjunction with this award, if I may. Ogden City recently completed the 1.1 mile, $6 million Ogden River Restoration Project, which was 2 years in the doing and more than 20 years in the planning. Benefits of the project have been dramatic. The improved river corridor allowed the spring flooding of 2011 to be assimilated by the floodplains without damage to property, while other nearby rivers were unable to contain their floodwaters. 13,000 tons of concrete, trash, glass, auto bodies were removed from the river, as well as 2,500 tires. The river stream banks were stabilized, an interior floodplain was constructed. Water flow was improved, natural vegetation was restored to reduce point and non-point pollution sources, and 11 pedestrian access points were added to enhance the experience of visitors. This project was a unique undertaking by a municipality and is being looked at by many other cities as a model for similar efforts. Aside from the water quality and other environmental improvements it offers, for example, improved river flows, an enhanced riparian corridor, and improved dissolved oxygen levels, the project has also provided educational, recreational, and social benefits. Ogden City is to be commended for its unprecedented vision, leadership, and perseverance in bringing this important project to fruition. The Water Quality Board recognizes Ogden City for the Ogden River Restoration Project and its contribution to Utah's water quality by awarding the city the 2012 Sudwicks Award. So congratulations.
At this time, we'd like to have Justin come up and accept this award on behalf of the city. This is Justin Anderson. Done a tremendous amount of work to help us all, so thank you, Justin.
Well done. Thank you for your leadership in moving water quality ahead.
Thank you. Justin, do you want to say anything?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to say it is an honor, Walt, to receive this award from the Water Quality Board. We are very proud of what we've been able to accomplish on the river, and we could not have done it without the partnerships along the way. And one of those partnerships has been the Water Quality Board, as well as many other federal, state, local, and private partners. And I just want to share a quick little story. And this was about a month ago. I was down on the river and I was given a tour to a group, and it was a nice spring day, and there was quite a few people going along the river. And one group that went by, and there was a father and some children on bicycles, and then a mother was coming up on the tail end. And as she came by, she kind of went past, and she stopped, and she turned, and she asked her, "Are you guys doing an inspection on the river today?" And I said, "No." I said, "Is there a problem?" And she said, "No, I just wanted to say thank you. We love it." And so for all of our partners and members of the community, we just want to say thank you, and we love it.
Thank you very much.
If I could add, this is the first time the recipient of the award has been a city or a project. For the last 24 years been an individual, and so this is a fairly unique element of this award. And so the board subcommittee that chose Ogden City was unanimous in its decision, so quite a remarkable project. Thank you.
Thank you again. And thank you, Mr. Baker. Good job. Next on our agenda is old business, and we'll have an overview. And first is the Arts Committee Sunset Ordinance. Mr. Cook.
Yes, thank you very much. This item was considered previously by the council. There were some suggestions for change. It's now been returned with changes made. One of the changes was the amount of time that the chair would serve was reduced from 3 years to annually. I think that is the main change that occurred. There were others that were discussed and have not been proposed at this point. So unless you have questions or concerns, you're welcome to consider it. We do have representatives from the Arts Committee here if you would like to have questions of them.
Questions? Further discussion?
There's no further discussion. I would make a motion to approve Ordinance 2012-40.
I second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Stevens to adopt proposed Ordinance 2012-40. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember Van Hoosier?
Aye.
Councilmember Wicks?
Aye.
Vice Chair Blair?
Aye.
Chair Garner?
Aye. This passes, and we want to commend the Arts Committee for all their hard work. Thank you. There's a lot of beautiful things around the city because of your efforts, so thank you very much. Next on the agenda is reports from the Planning Commission and Mr. Montgomery.
Mr. Chair and members of the council, tonight you had set this time aside to discuss the 21st Street Corridor Plan. So I'd like to just run through those things we've talked about before, because you've looked at this a couple times, about what is the corridor and the corridor plan. The corridors, as we have defined, are those major transportation links that come in to the city. And because of their size and their volume, they kind of set boundaries of land uses around them. And the corridor plan tries to address development that takes place in those corridors, looking at the future opportunities and restrictions that may exist in those properties, and then to look at possibilities of what can happen in those locations. This is a rundown. The Planning Commission first started working on this back in February of 2011, and through their process and the public hearing they had in September of last year, recommended to you the corridor plan you have considered tonight. In December, the council looked at this and received some public input, and there were some questions that came up, and those questions were then continued and discussed in February of this year. And then, because of all the other projects you had going on, in February, you set this July 10th date as the final input for the plan and to take action on it. And so tonight, we're going to try to address those items that came up. Again, 21st Street Corridor, everyone's aware of its location. In terms of the 7 corridors in the city, it ranks 6th in terms of trips per day. You can see the other corridors of how they rate in trip generation. And to understand the corridor plan, you also need to understand what you're working with. And of course, 21st Street didn't always exist the way it does now. Back before the freeway came in, there was really not a connection between the west area and Wall Avenue. You had some individual lots that existed until you hit the railroad tracks. And then the railroad tracks were the dividing line. There was a surface road called Middleton Way, which had to cross all those tracks. It was very little used. And then you had farmland west of those tracks. Once the freeway went in, of course, and then the expressway went in, you had a couple factors take place. One, you had a pond created, as they used that as a borrow for the overpasses of the freeway. And the river flooded into those areas, and we created a lake. And so that happened in the mid-'70s. Then with opening up that area, what had been the back door of the city now became an entrance. And so those areas that were all salvage yards, now the 21st Street dropped you right into salvage yard areas. And so that started to change the nature of what was taking place. And so the character of that area has gradually changed, especially east of the railroad tracks. What had been large salvage yard operations have now been replaced in many instances with businesses. And so you've seen a change taking place there. We've identified some of those things that have taken place in the most recent area. We've rezoned a lot of that east of the tracks to CBD. You've had of course, the Walmart development take place. You see a picture of Roofer Supply, how they built a brand new building on their property. The river restoration, which you've just heard about, taking place along those sections of the river. And even some of the cleanup areas that have taken place with the 21st Street Pond and what the railroad did in there, and taking care of some environmental concerns in those locations. So you've had a lot of changes taking place. Also, some things have gone on to try to improve the corridor, but have not always been successful. Back in 1996, we had a grant to try to enhance the landscaping along the corridor with the state. Unfortunately, a lot of that then, as we got installed, then was cut down through the maintenance crews that the state had at that point. And so we lost a lot of the improvements we were trying to make along that corridor to give it a good visual appearance as you come into the city, because again, these corridors give first impressions of what the community is about. And where, as I mentioned, we were using this as a salvage yard entrance, a lot of changes had to happen to change your experience as you come into town. And so we've tried to make a lot of those changes take place so it's more of a positive experience. So the corridor plan looks at 5 things: enhancements, infrastructure, trails, land use, and transportation. And in doing this, we looked at the enhancements. And in those areas that are yellow and orange, we talked about landscape enhancements that could improve both the visual quality as you enter into the downtown via the 21st Street entrance, and the types of improvements those should be, whether they're low vegetation, whether they're taller vegetation, whether they're enhancing views or screening objectionable views. And so the plan tries to identify those types of things. The plan then also, as I mentioned, looks at utilities of where we're lacking in infrastructure. If lands are to develop, there are needed utilities that have to be installed. And so it tries to address public utilities in terms of water lines, sewer lines, how drainage would work if vacant lands are developed, and tries to foresee what we need to be looking at, or developers need to be looking at, if they want to actually develop those properties, that there may be infrastructure that needs to take place. We also looked at trails. The blue shows existing trails. The red shows what we'd call proposed trails, both connections to the Front Runner track that would connect from Front Runner to the river, trails on the south side of the river, east of Gibson. So there's a loop system of trails there, so that people can take advantage of those amenities and be able to get in and out of the different things we have to offer here in Ogden. And so the plan talks about trying to make sure we keep the trails we have, we improve them, and we also get some other connections so that there are links to different areas and that people have options in terms of usage of the trails. The plan identifies those. Then the plan looks at 5 land use areas, and they're shown here by the different colors, and they each have a different characteristic to them, each have potentials to them, looking towards the future from what exists now. And so the plan tries to identify each of those sections. So the first section it talks about is that, for lack of a better term, the triangle area between 20th and 21st. This is kind of a transition area. As you go up, come up over the railroad tracks, and you start to then drop down into the city on that bend of 21st Street. You're given some opportunities for some views into the city and the mountains. You got some framed vistas with the trees. And so you're trying to look at development there that brings people into the city, that creates that transition area. And one of the things that the plan talked about is that visual expression of what takes place, about maintaining those vistas. This is from the top of the bridge looking into the town, and of course the clouds covered the mountain that day we took the picture, but you've seen those mountains before, but they're very striking as you come into the city. And so taking a look at those things and trying to enhance those vistas and maintain them. So one of the things we talked about is how do you capture and enhance what exists. So this map up on top shows those areas that are being talked about in terms of potential height limitations. And then the pictures below show what would a 35-foot tall building look like in that area, or what would a 70-foot tall building look like in that area, and what does it block as you come in off the freeway. And so those visual simulations are trying to show that so you can get an idea, because I know that was one of the concerns that was expressed in the meetings back in December about this idea of a height limitation. The blue area shows the 35-foot proposal in terms of looking towards the future, and then you see what that building would look like. And then if you decided not to take advantage of that, then what would a 70-foot tall building look like in that same location? And so, it's one question of just a visual judgment of, is that an important view as you enter into the city? And should those restrictions be placed? Now, I need to make mention that in the plan is a guideline of where we want to go in the future. But it's not an ordinance, so it does not enact anything, but it gives guidance then to ordinances being created to set those standards. So that's one key thing you should understand is this gives suggestions of what should happen in the future, but it is not an ordinance. It doesn't set the standards yet. This would be the reason, though, then you could justify an ordinance if you feel this is an important policy. And so that's a decision you need to make, because that's an issue that is out there of that concern. And I need to point out, too, that as you look at this map, the map that was shown back in December and January was in error. It went beyond the triangle piece we're talking about. The plan language only talked about between 20th and 21st Street. And so this is an amended drawing to make sure it follows what the text is saying. And so one of the things we'd ask that you adopt this, if you choose to adopt it, that this is the map you adopt, not the one that was shown back in December and January, because it was an error. This is the area we're talking about here.
Greg, before you leave that page, so can you sort of just give us an idea of how many stories those two different drawings would?
Well, 35 feet would be a two-story building, generally. You may be able to get 3 stories out of it, depending on how you do your floor heights. But if you're a commercial retail, I'd say 2 is safe. 3, you may be a little tight. 70 feet is generally going to be around 6.
Does the plan or the height restrictions have any impact as we get closer to the river on the other side? Does it have any type of regulations to them or affect them?
Well, this area is not by the river. It's between the 2 streets, 20th and 21st. And so that's the only area we're talking about of potential height limitations.
But would it impact the property across? Does it have any impact whatsoever to that?
No, it wouldn't. I mean, with the way the road works and how it becomes elevated to go over the freeway and that type of thing, it wouldn't have any real impact to the properties to the north.
Okay.
Was there pressure to raise the height limitation or to lower it? You need to remind me. I can't remember.
The blue area, some of the questions were it should be higher. There should not be a limit on this area. And it should not be 35 feet. It should be higher if there was going to be a limit. Yeah. As you look, and then as you get to Wall Avenue, the red is a higher area because based on the angles you travel on, it doesn't really impact the visual quality if your goal is to be able to see into the city and the mountains.
In that zone, what type of buildings or uses would go that high?
Well, it is a commercial zone, a CBD zone. So there may be a variety of type of commercial buildings that may look at that. I mean, that's kind of isolated from the rest of the downtown. And you may call it more of a freeway type commercial, even though it's not by the freeway, that may look at that. There are other factors besides just height limitations. There's building codes. Sometimes building codes, people don't want to do what's needed for a taller building because it triggers new building codes. Sometimes the soils can't take a taller building because there may be more collapsible soils, and so soil conditions could also limit the height of a building.
I was just thinking that, even in our junction, we had a hard time getting a building that tall.
Yeah.
So I just kind of wondered what it might be, or what could we foresee that might go there that would need to be that tall? And I just don't see anything. But because we can't tell for sure what would happen in the future of what will be the actual building. But the principle is that vista an important vista? If it is, then here's a way to preserve that vista. If it's not, then it really doesn't matter in terms of the height. Thank you.
The next land use section is that which is to the north of 20th Street, and that's we identify as a mixed-use development. This is where Walmart is now. There's vacant properties along the riverway, and we can see, again, potential for development of mixed uses happening along here that take advantage of the river and the opportunities that are there. Again, with the enhancements that have taken place on the river, there's just future potentials there. So we see this as a real mixed-use area that could have a lot of variety of things take place in it that are commercial, residential, offices, those type of things that can take advantage of that amenity. And so that's what the plan identifies should be taking place there. And then to the south of 21st Street, we identify this as a transit-oriented development. This is an area between the 21st Street Expressway and the Front Runner. And with those proximities, you've got some great potential for more dense development that could take place in the future. keeping the design principles of transit-oriented development in place, that parking's either in the building or back behind the building. It's very compact, has height to it. Again, these are future visions. It's not saying that's what is going to take place now. It's not saying there's a developer out there to do it. It's saying these are areas, though, we think that potential exists. And as private development works out with the property owners of what can and can't happen, these are the guidelines we would like to see happen in the future. Then there's the area where the pond is. And this was another item of discussion back in February. And that is separating out what is the public land versus the private property there. And so you can see the map has been altered somewhat here, where the private land has the option of CRC or C2 zoning, so the commercial recreation or commercial zoning. Either option could take place at the time the property owner wants to try to do something there. So it gives that option. The city-owned property, then we'd recommend be rezoned from M2 to either CRC or O1 because it's really not manufacturing property. It is a recreational area where the fishing takes place, the boating takes place, the trails go around the pond. And so we're making those distinctions because that was one of the questions that came up, and we felt that is a valid concern, that the private land have that commercial opportunity, much like the West Haven land does to the west of it. And so that's one revision to the plan that you see that was not there back in February.
Craig, if you have that recommendation to rezone, do you have a timeline?
We would do it as the property owner makes a petition. So this is a guideline for the future, if you will, that saying here are some options for the future if you want to do something different with the property, that we would entertain petitions to rezone it to these.
And what about the city property?
The city part is something we can initiate on our own, and that's how I would suggest doing that.
Do you have a timeline for doing the city-owned property, or?
Well, it all depends what you do with the plan. If you adopt it, I mean, those are things we could follow through and try to have it accomplished sometime in this year.
With respects to the private versus the CRC versus the just the commercial, there's been some petitioners that would want to see commercial, but I guess talk about that just a little bit, if you would. What would be the upsides, downsides? What's the impact?
CRC is a lot more limited in types of commercial allowed. For lack of a better term, it's the rainbow garden zone.
I see. Okay.
That is the only place we have the CRC right now. So it allowed types of recreational activity things, but then spin-offs with restaurants, gift shops, things like that.
So you initially, I think back in December, that's what your recommendation was, is to make it all CRC. Yeah. And I guess, how do you feel about the change?
Well, I think given what West Haven has done to the property to the west, it'd be straight commercial. I don't see why this should not have that same option.
You don't have any anxiety?
No.
Okay.
And there's one property owner, private, that was feeling pretty strongly to want it commercial. Wasn't that true?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because, again, if that is taking place next to them, why shouldn't they have the same type of opportunity?
Right.
Then the last area that the plan talks about is that area which is south of the 21st Street area, the manufacturing area. There's a sliver between the road and the railroad that is privately owned. And again, the concern is how do you create a good entryway along there so it doesn't look like it's not an inviting community to come into. How do you make enhancements? How do you let land use in there that are appropriate and not the salvage yards that we had before the road went in? M2 allows salvage yards, M1 doesn't. And so it's taking a look to make sure those type of uses don't happen and suggesting to rezone it from M2 to M1. The other part of the plan then talks about the transportation layout. And it talks about the idea that these neighborhoods and these vacant lands need to have some connections to make them more functional. They've struggled for years in terms of development along 20th or 21st Street because of the one-way access that exists and the inability to really generate the traffic needed to make those areas successful. But linking the two areas together so there's better circulation, so it's not just Wall Avenue, but there's some internal circulation that can help open up properties for development is an important part. And then as we talked about last time, while the plan shows road layouts to the neighborhood that is to the south of 21st Street, these are not planned roads that will happen right now. These are things that would happen if properties are acquired by private developers and then they want to look at some circulation systems that can give them more frontages of how we see that layout taking place.
Glad you emphasized that, because I was going to say this is a plan for the future as development occurs.
The city has no plans of acquiring property or anything like that in those areas. But we see that, you know, if the potential happens and there are private investors looking to buy properties and working with the property owners and do that, creating some better block frontages and circulation would improve the developability of those properties if something different is happening than the mixed uses that take place right now between the manufacturing and the residential uses that are in that area.
I recall on our first meeting that the residents were a little concerned about how the roads were going to be developed, but I think the key issue is that we're not looking to change today, but in the future there is a possibility that we would have a plan in place.
Yeah, because those block patterns as they are now, there's some very small roads, alleyways and that, and looking at a more uniform pattern in the future of more uniform block size, you know, that just helps the development pattern along. So I guess what you could say is we're not saying we're committed to the road pattern that exists right now in the future. But I should also mention, though, that the plan does talk about the road system now does need some improvements to it because of the way people use the road from the front runner and connect on to 21st Street. The road they travel on is really inadequate.
That's Reeves Avenue?
Yeah.
Doesn't have sidewalk or curb.
Well, the width of it is, it moves back and forth depending on how the wind blows and that type of thing. So there are improvements the plan talks about need to be made there because of the traffic that does travel on that street.
And I think that's a strength of the program is that we're looking at those current conditions that need to be improved on, and I think a plus for the plan.
And that is the plan. Do you have any other questions of me?
I do. You talked about wrapping the silos. What would have to happen? How would the stars have to line up for that to happen?
Well, the stars would line up with the property owner who they did express in the Planning Commission meeting some interest in that. And then it would be a funding source to do that. Because it couldn't be an advertisement for the property owner because that would be a sign. Right. But it could be a graphic of some art. I mean, that could be a potential art project. You have that. It could be a grant of some kind, or it could be a capital improvement project. Okay. Thank you.
Greg, I just have one very loosely related question for you. In light of the river award that we received tonight, I just wondered if it would be appropriate to maybe request a review of the possibility of a height restriction in the CBD zone next to the river.
I think that's one of the things, as we're looking at the CBD revisions of the ordinance, that's one of our projects this year. One of the things we're really looking at is some form-based ideas and picking out sections of the form base of those areas and what are the characteristics and what should be the design criteria for that. So that is something we're looking at. In the MU zone now, we talk about what shadow does it cast in the river. And I think that's still critical because we make all those improvements, and if you keep that shaded all winter long, you've changed the habitat again. So I think those are things we'll be looking at in that, but Wonderful. It was not a part of this plan.
I know. That's why it was very loosely related. Thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Montgomery? Okay, thank you, sir. At this time, we'll accept public input regarding the 21st Street Corridor Plan. Please state your name and your address, and comments are 3 minutes.
I am Samuel Fernandez. I live at 2136 Reeves Avenue. Just as was mentioned earlier, there's some misunderstanding on sidewalks. There are sidewalks there, but they're in disrepair. It's taken me last year of August to find out who the engineer for the sidewalk and curb was. Part of the problem we're having now is funding for the area, Grid 29 in particular. I've talked to Mr. Daniels, who heads up the engineering department up there for that area. Part of the problem he has is money and funding for Grid 29 to make those improvements on 29th Street, or 21st on Reeves in the affected area. So I'd like to ask the council to see if there can be any expedition to try to get those issues resolved sooner, because talking with Mr. Daniels, he's saying it's about a 2-year outlook. Some of those areas on those sidewalks pull a lot of water during the winter, which become an ice rink. If people are not familiar with that area, and if I don't catch a part of the problem where I have to maintain, someone can slip and fall and injure themselves. So if there's anything you guys can do to expedite those people that are in front of me to get some of those issues resolved, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, it's a pleasure to see some of you again. I didn't think I'd be standing here for a long time. I want to congratulate you on the hard work you've done on the river that we started way back when. Greg's done a wonderful job. All you folks have done an insane job on getting this thing and pulling it forward. And I'm very proud, and almost brings tears to my eyes to see that river come out the way it has. Well, today I volunteered to work on a nonprofit that I can't speak about who it is today, but my name is Scott Brown. I live at 1570 East 23rd Street half the time, and the other half the time I live on a sailboat. But my residency is still here in Ogden. And I wanted to talk about the plan. There seems to be a lot of confusion. I went to one of the meetings, and I'm very confused as to the generation to plan, how it was done. I'm fairly familiar with planning commission meetings, and I didn't remember any conversations about restrictive heights or restrictive use, changing M1 or M2 to M1, and I don't remember any conversations about not allowing any drive-up windows or, a 65-foot build limit. But I did want to say a couple of things. We're in a process of developing or helping developing a project. And I'm here to represent not only myself, but Riverwalk Company, LP. And Mr. Garner, I believe you got a letter from them? All right. What I'd like to do is I'd like to start out slow. I have some questions, and I'm going to try to make this fast. I know I have 3 minutes. It's going to be almost impossible. I may have to come up again and hope for your patience. But if I could get a little help, I could put a USB, or I could put this on the screen, whatever works.
Why don't we put the screen?
Okay. Well, this is faster.
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
That's fine.
Just this first one, okay?
Oh, can you make that? Oh, great.
Do you want to zoom in?
I think that'll work. Do you have a pointer, or should I just use my finger? Oops. Bear with me. This is a photograph that we had Thayer Blackburn Associates architects do for us, and then put in an actual image of what it might look like. One of the projects that I can't speak to liberty to announce yet, because we're just going through the final financing stages and sponsorships, is 80 feet tall. And that project sits just to the north of Walmart, about 200 feet east of the kayak park on the riverbank there. That's circled right now is a 100-foot building, 50 feet wide, okay? And as you can see, it's behind the trees. And I'm standing on top of just where the apex starts to go back down over the top of the view corridor that you're talking about. So I just wanted to point that out. So if you move that building over to here, which I will do, you'll see that the restrictions for the views are insurmountable. I don't think they're insurmountable. I think they're quite reasonable. So I want to go to the next sheet and show you that. Now this is from a little different perspective that Greg Montgomery showed you. If you go past, follow this and go all the way past into about right there, and if you're looking right through those trees, you will see what Greg's building looked like. About 30 feet, 5 feet tall, very red, very large. But if you're sitting on the top, that's a 100-foot tall building, 50 feet wide by 50 feet wide. That gives you a little better perspective, and we got a better picture because there wasn't any clouds. So that kind of helps out. I just wanted to show you that. This next photograph is the same thing, 100-foot tall, 50 feet wide by 50 feet tall. I just stuck it on a flat piece. I think it's probably 200 feet west of where the kayak park, I believe, is. And it's just to show you, if you were on 20th Street at ground level looking across, it kind of gives you an idea just against the trees of what that would look like. Now, and the plan of the developer, I know that's not what he's planning on doing, but that's just an example of what your vision and view would be if you were on ground level looking that way. Our confusion is that when I read your Exhibit A and I looked at the plan that's submitted to the public, it shows this that area next to Walmart as being part of this corridor study and part of the heights restrictions. And have they changed the Exhibit A that they've submitted to you to take that out, those restrictions out, or are they still in that exhibit?
We'll get an answer for you.
Okay, because I don't know, because I've only got what was on the internet.
Yeah, I just want to get your comments, because primarily we're looking between 20th and 21st Street.
Okay, because the one that we got that's available to the public talks all the way to the river. I guess you're familiar with that. Okay, thank you. Now, our intention is to, of course, the developer, again, I'm not working for the developer, I'm doing this as I'm helping with a nonprofit trying to get this thing going. Mr. Lesham, which is the LP, the Riverwalk LP, was not able to be here, so I'm trying to do the best I can to express his views. Anyway, when you get to the bottom line, when we went to these meetings, again, there was no discussions, and please stop me at any time if I'm talking too long. I understand. I can stop at any time and come back if you like.
Yeah. Your time's up, so we'll
all right, I'll try to make it as brief as possible. I won't try to go over it over and over again. If you were to have the restrictions you have and limitations up to the river, not only including, we would lose our funding. Our project would be dead. I have 2 projects that would stop. So it's really important that we understand or don't misunderstand what the intention of the ordinance is.
We'll have you work with Mr. Montgomery, but
thank you
primarily
so much.
We're looking at 20th to 21st Street.
All right, thank you. Would anybody like me to leave these up here? Or? Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Larry Bedome. I own the Keller Williams Commercial Brokerage here in Ogden. And my comments are specifically to the area between 20th and 21st Street. I actually represent the landowners on that parcel. As you may well know, there's a, thank you. Thank you. As you may well know, there's actually a contract on a portion of that land right now. There was a previous company that looked to locate there, and the building that they wanted to build was about 85 feet tall. That company may or may not come back to the table, but there's another company that's looking to take a portion of that property. The property in particular that was identified in red would be the remaining property that's not sold under the current contract. The very first item that a company asks me when they look to relocate here in Ogden is, what's the zoning? What other kinds of restrictions may be in place in order for us to locate our business in Ogden? I'm concerned that any type of a height restriction in this corridor would prevent future businesses from potentially locating there. It's a small market, and we're working really hard to continue to bring new businesses in here, and it just concerns me that there'd be an arbitrary restriction on height on just that location. I didn't see on the map that there's a height restriction on the other side of Wall. So as you come down the viaduct, and for a brief moment at 40 miles an hour, you're going to see a building, and then you're going to be at Wall, and there's no height restriction. So it's just a little perplexing as to why that particular area is the only one that has a height restriction identified with it. The only other quick item I have was on the other parcels that have a potential restriction on drive-up windows. There again, as a broker dealing with businesses that are wanting to locate here, as an example, the Kneaders that's going in on Washington, that was one of their requirements to locate. They had to have a drive-up window. So we're not going to allow a Kneaders-style restaurant to be located in that zone and limit another potential business from coming in. I don't get it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry.
Good evening. I'm Janine Pappas Timothy. I'm here with my brother John Pappas tonight. We own the property that was on the screen from the gentleman who presented the development or the plan. We own the property that Roofer Supply sits on, and we own the business Roofer Supply. We've been in Ogden for more than 40 years, so we are committed to this city. We're invested in the city. We're part of the fabric of this city. You saw our new building, which was built about 5 years ago, and we were very committed to make sure that the new building not only served what we needed as a business, but it served the city well. And we believe we created it's a good-looking building. It fits the property well. But we are also owners of the property right on Wall Avenue, and I've got my north and south mixed up. So I agree with the speaker who was just up before me that I think the height restriction would not serve the city well, and it would not serve us as landowners well, because we are looking to develop that property. We're looking to develop it in a very conscientious manner to make sure it enhances Ogden, and it also continues to bring in revenue for Ogden. It helps with the tax base. It helps with the people that pass this way. It serves their needs. So I agree with the speaker who was just up before us. I don't think it's a long enough drive for people to really sit back and take a view of the mountains. There's so many other areas in Ogden that present themselves so beautifully, but coming up off the freeway, I don't believe is one of those. Plus, to have a height restriction would certainly impact the future development of our property. I also agree that I think the restriction on a drive-up window would not serve Ogden well. The gentleman mentioned a Kneaders who needs that in order to build and open up a bakery, a restaurant there. Banks now have drive-ups. Coffee places have drive-ups. Pharmacies have drive-ups, whether it's a small pharmacy or a Walgreens that has a business in it, but also has the drive-up. There are so many types of businesses that we could develop our land to include, but those restrictions could truly impact us and lessen our ability to do what we think is going to be right for ourselves and right for Ogden. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kurt Geiger, and it's been about 4 years since I've been in front of this group. I'm glad to see you're all well. Mayor Caldwell organized a group of, brought us all to lunch from the outdoor industry last week. And we sat and talked about, he asked what we needed in the community to continue to enhance the image of Ogden as the outdoor hub of the United States. And I'm fully aware of a project that is being planned on that piece of property that we all would greatly approve of to enhance us as an outdoor community that would not be able to be built if the height restrictions that Mr. Montgomery has proposed are accepted. And you know, I'm not at liberty to say what that is at this juncture. It's not my bill job, so I shouldn't go public with it. But I think time needs to be spent to find out what plans are for that area before there is a height restriction placed on there that would prevent. I think there's been 2 or 3 people talk here about planning to do something that is taller than 65 feet, more in the 85 feet category before you make a decision to halt that, because I think it would be sad to prevent it from happening. So thank you so much.
My name is Thane Fisher, and I actually live in Ogden, 2500 Tyler, and I've been here a couple times to address this issue. I believe the last time that I was here to address the issue, the council had asked that the city would reach out to the property owners, and I can say that for me, it's personally not happened, but I have been in discussion with the city, I think on obviously a project's been referenced before, and that project would be higher than the 35, proposed 65 to 85. As far as the and I don't know if this will show up, but I don't know that. I don't know if you can get that up there, but that's today. That's the hood of my car. That's the apex on the uphill from where we are. So you can see that those trees on that 11 acres, and I am talking about the 11 acres between 21st and 20th, are well over, I originally thought they were about 75 feet, but I believe they're over 100 feet tall. That is the view corridor as I drove over this afternoon, and that's the top of the apex on the uphill side. If you were to, this is another shot that actually includes the city view, and you can see right in here, that's the actual Wells Fargo building, Ben Lomond, and it doesn't, in my opinion, impact. This is the downhill apex, about another 50 feet forward on the overpass, and again, you can see the tree line. The tree line is well over 100 feet, and you know, I don't see where a 35-foot, it would restrict the property, in my opinion, to any future progress for Ogden and future development. I don't think a height restriction serves the best use for the city as well. So I would ask that you do not approve a height restriction on this property. It will impede future development opportunity. And we just don't know what that is until it does happen. So as Larry had mentioned, that when developers come in, they typically do have site selectors. They look at what restrictions are placed on the property, and they will not even sometimes take that step forward to inquire whether those restrictions can be modified or such. So any type of restrictions, in my opinion, would hurt this area. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Gary Nielsen. I run several of the businesses at the Solomon Center. Just for reference, the Solomon Center, the IROC climbing wall, that building's about 100 feet tall. So when you look at that, you're kind of getting a representative. The hotel that was built right in front of us is probably 80 to 100 feet with the facade on top of it. And I was worried that when they built the hotel, we would lose the view out of all of our windows of the mountains, and that concerned me because we had basically an unobstructed view. When they've built that, we still have a great view of the mountains because you have the street corridor that's 60 or 80 feet wide that looks between the buildings, and so there's still plenty of view of the mountains in both directions. As you look north towards the temple, there's still plenty of view. The slide that Greg showed with the two representations of the height, he had that blocked all the way across that area, probably several hundred feet long. And in a typical development, you may have buildings, but you'll have space in between the buildings, so you'll still have a look in between those. I drive that corridor every day, and honestly, 9 out of the time, 10 days that I drive that corridor, I don't look at the mountain because I'm too busy looking at the crappy railroad yard and the junkyard on the south side and the buildings. And the problem is those are 30 and 40-foot buildings. So as you go up the viaduct and you look off, all you're looking at is rooftops. And if you leave that area in between 20th and 21st is 35 foot, you're going to look at rooftops and you're going to see rooftop units, and that's all you're going to see. And that's, I think, counterproductive to what we're trying to do, because people are going to look what's around them. They aren't gazing at the mountains as they're driving. They're looking what's ahead of them and what's close to them. And all you have to do is drive that corridor and you'll see the same thing. Another prime example, the businesses will really be hurt with those height restrictions. If you think about Farmington, when they built the corridor there and put the new freeway there below Cherry Hills, we've had several developers that wanted us to go out there and put our businesses out there. And when they built that corridor there and elevated the freeway, it severely hurt those businesses because you can't see the businesses. You look at the top of the roofs, you can't see their frontage, you can't see their signage. So I would suggest that you don't have a height restriction there, and that in terms of the corridor plan, I think the corridor plan is great. I think there's a lot of aspects in there that are great planning and things that can be done. But I envision things that could be great entrances to our city there. It could be a water park there. There could be a 7 or 8 story hotel there to make use of the river in the background. A lot of cities have that and build along that river and have some high-rise buildings. And as we get more density, that could be a great area for that, wrapping around Walmart and also down to the corridor. One more thing I just wanted to say about the plan. I think it's more beneficial to make your plan a little bit more lenient. Then, as Greg mentioned, you can restrict certain things with building codes. That way, if you make it more restrictive, it's really difficult to loosen up those requirements in the future if you made a mistake. Thank you.
Gary.
My name's Rob Harris. I'm a property owner on the west side of the corridor. I've been in discussion with Mr. Molding, which is my neighbor across the street, which we're a little unique situation where we have property in West Haven and a property in Ogden City. And we feel that, and he's given me permission to speak for him on this as well, that we feel that by splitting up our zoning on our property is going to severely limit any potential we might have for future development and improvements on our properties. And we are obviously opposed to that. Also, I drive the corridor every single day, multiple times a day, and I agree with you're going to be looking at rooftops if we're too low. I've always thought that center section, even though I have nothing to do with it, would be a great place for a very nice hotel or something, and I don't think that's out of the question. But if we impose limits on height and what we can do with this property from drive-ins, developers just walk away. I have experience with this. To me, it's reminiscent of the Windsor Hotel, which I was awarded the contract on, which got shot down because of a height limit that, from what I understand, was corrected later, and that pulled $3 million of development to that building. And as you well know, it's sitting vacant and probably going to get burned down because of it. So, but yeah, any limitations to this scares developers away, and I think it needs to be open and business friendly. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further comment from the public? Okay. Further comment from council members?
I have a question for Greg. And I'm not on the Planning Commission, but I've been from a distance following a height controversy in Cottonwood Heights with a developer that's proposing a higher building. And so I guess I'm just asking you, Is there something you could do where there was some sort of compromise that if the higher the building was, there more of a setback? Because I know that's sort of the issue in Cottonwood Heights, and does that satisfy some of the concerns?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. In many places, you're right, they'll do setbacks, a step back from property lines and then go up higher. And that's one way to achieve of not creating a canyon effect along the street. And so if that's the objective, then yeah, that's certainly a way you can approach it. If you're looking at a visual corridor, you're just identifying what are the key parts you want to preserve, and then identify those steeps. So there may be a different approach, because now you're looking at a longer view rather than just what you experience as you drive next to buildings. So the setting has a lot to do with what tool do you use to make both work. You know, it's one of those things where there's a lot of other factors involved about heights. We're trying all the time to get people to build more than a two-story building, and it hasn't happened. We keep saying, let's go taller, go taller. No, only doing 2 stories. You know, so we'd love to have taller buildings in locations, and people won't do it. And so it's interesting that now that there's also a market for taller buildings, that we can't get them to build in Washington Boulevard or Grant or Lincoln or any of those locations. So,
Mr. Montgomery, with that comment that you just made, one of the members of the public brought up, you know, what are some of the restrictions on the east side of Wall? Do we have any height restrictions?
No, there aren't.
And do we have any height restrictions
and there wouldn't be on the north side of 20th Street or the south side of 21st Street. It was just looking at the idea of a quarter view. And, you know, if that's not an important part, then that really doesn't matter, because, like you said, the others will not have any restrictions that way. So that was a comment that came up that we explored and put in the plan. And so it's just, if that's not an important part, then.
Greg, could you review the discussion that the Planning Commission had? I'm sure they were reviewing the heights and whether there should be restrictions or whether they shouldn't be. And can you review their discussion on that? Whether and what impact would a 100-foot building do to this area?
Well, the discussion was, what do you do to improve the entrances into the city as you're driving in? And some of the discussion that you heard tonight talked on that, about how do you screen some of those views where you're just looking down the rail yard or you're looking at the industrial parts. How do you focus your attention to what you're coming into and create a positive impression to that? Do you do that by maybe saying you just put more landscaping up front by the expressway and let that be the softening edge? That is definitely one approach that could be taken.
Which would sort of be like a setback.
Right, that you're just landscaping that more. So you take that approach. Do you limit the mass of the building? Sometimes people will look at, say, well, there's a certain ratio of footprint to total square footage. So some places do it that way. So there's a variety of tools that can be looked at if there are different objectives you're trying to achieve. If the case is, well, you know, those cottonwood trees won't be there forever, they will die, then what takes that place? And if it's just buildings and with new landscaping, that could be an approach.
So did they have a discussion about heights then?
Well, that's where they talked about that idea of a view angle, that from the expressway as you're looking, what do you see straight out as you look? And that's where that 35-foot concept came in, as you go around the bend and as you look and then drop down. As you look towards the mountain, do you see the peaks? Do you see the main part of the mountain? If that was important, that's what they felt. That then the further away you are from that, then the taller you can go because of the angles that you have. Just like was mentioned with the drawings or the photos you saw, that as you're on the bridge actually looking, you can see a lot more of the mountain than once you start off the bridge and go down, then you get limited views. So it's all angles, and it's all what are the things that are important to preserve, or is the town itself, as far as the infrastructure and buildings, the key asset you want to have as you come in. And that's that's very much a good entryway too, if development like that would really happen.
So again, with the comment you just made, when you're first on the highest part of the bridge, shouldn't that be then the highest height limit?
Not necessarily, because you're on a car looking this way, so you're already looking up at that point. That's when you start coming down, then you're still looking at what's taking place. Then you have more restrictions happening.
What was their viewpoint on drive-up windows then?
Well, that's only for the transit-oriented development section.
Okay.
And that is contrary to the concept of transit-oriented development. If you've got transit-oriented development, you don't accommodate the car for every business. You park one location and you go to different areas. So that's the only place that was talked about, is in the transit-oriented sections. Much like our MU zone, we don't allow drive-ups in the MU zone because it's a different concept. The other parts of the plan, those are fine. So, from 21st Street north, those are all fine options. So those are the types of things. And again, this is kind of a direction for the future. It's not an ordinance that says if you want to do this tomorrow, you can't do it. But as we look towards zones and ordinances and that type of thing, this gives guidance to the future of what do we want in those ordinances.
So, Mr. Montgomery, if a business, let's say we adopted this with a height restriction, but we had a business that came, like a hotel that Mr. Harrop suggested or something, and they said, we really want to build an 8-story hotel. You're saying maybe we could look at that and look at that, or is this just a
well, right now we don't have an ordinance that would restrict that, and even if you adopt this doesn't have an ordinance with it.
To restrict that?
Correct. It just gives guidance for the future of as we develop ordinances for those areas.
Okay.
What are the things we're looking at?
I think a good point to note is, you give the example that no drive-ups are allowed in mixed-use zones, but Neaters is.
We changed.
And we changed. We made an exception because they were willing to put in various landscaping amenities and things like that to help make it work.
And I think you made a good point with the drive-up windows. Then I'll touch on another item. Part of the drive-up windows, too, in the transit-oriented area, and even in this area that we live in, is we do try to limit that a little bit to improve our air quality, especially in the winter months, and encourage transit-oriented and, getting out of our cars and not driving them around so much. I'd like to address Mr. Harrop's question real quick. He says where he lives, he has split zoning, or it could be split zoning.
I'm not aware of where he's at because there's only the molding property that's in the West Haven section, and then you got the is it Dominguez? I went blank on the name. I think it's Dominguez. That's in the Ogden City part, and then it's the Ogden City property. So I'm not aware of another property owner on that side.
And the molding property is commercial, or is it?
Well, the front part is commercial, and Ogden City actually now owns the mound. And so the front part is commercial in West Haven.
And part of this corridor plan is that we would allow commercial also.
On the private properties.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So that would eliminate that issue with split zoning. Correct?
But I thought he was talking about
across the street. You got split cities, so
right.
What our zoning is and what West Haven is maybe two different types of things. Even though there may be commercial, what they allow.
Okay.
But I'm not. So I don't know which is. Maybe he's on the other side of the street, and that is all manufacturing right now. And we're proposing to still stay manufacturing.
We'll have him get with you and just kind of let him tell you exactly where he's at.
Which piece it is.
So what do we typically do where you have a property where it's on the border with Ogden City, and do we take into consideration what the zoning is in the neighboring?
We try to.
Or
yeah, we try to look at that because, especially if it's one property owner in two different cities, we try to work that out so that they can.
Does that come up often? I am trying to recall if I've ever.
Well.
That.
There's some questions about North Street where we've had to deal with some of that, and most times the roads create the divisions, but we do have south of 36th Street above Quincy, where the back lot may be South Ogden and then the other lot is Ogden City. But again, the lot lines in the backyard set that.
Yeah.
So there's very few properties that actually one owner is in two cities, but this is an example of where that happens.
I think we've addressed most of the height, restriction that we could adjust that if needed. The other one is the address at 2136 Reeves. We'll probably have to have this gentleman and neighbors there get with the city.
Public Works on that.
Okay. Is Mr. Daniels their best contact, or?
Yes. If you'll see me after, we'll get him a phone number.
I've got the phone number. I'm just bringing up the issues that are present.
Thank you.
So
we all wrote it down.
So we'll follow up on that. Okay.
I'm just going to throw this out for discussion in light of how many comments we've had tonight and maybe the possibility of, I think the view shed's important to everyone, but welcoming business is important too. I just want to throw out the possibility of tabling this while we discuss it a little bit further.
Well, and I think what's interesting is it's not been, the concern about the view sheds have not been brought up by any of the residents that live in the area or any of the, business owners with property on the ground. It's concerned about what people are seeing when they're driving in. Yeah. I think it is important to preserve view sheds, but I also think a lot of the times people are hopefully concentrating on the road and where they're driving. So
we hope so.
Yeah.
The other thing, if I'm sorry, did I interrupt? Are you finished?
I'm finished.
There are a couple of things that kind of came to my mind is, there are some, I think I wouldn't be opposed to seeing a nice commercial project going on. I don't think that's offensive to my sensibilities when I'm entering a city. I think you expect to see stuff like that. About 12 years ago, when I was on the Planning Commission, we were all set, and we were way down the road to turn that property into a transfer station. And Weber County was all set to put a transfer station there, and we were way down the road on that, and we were okay with it. Boy, I'll tell you what, I'd a lot rather see some commercial there than a transfer station. And so to contrast what we're willing to do and what we shouldn't, I don't know. I'm inclined to go ahead and eliminate the height restriction just for that reason. And the other thing that Mr. Montgomery said is, if they'll really do it anyway, I'm not sure how many buildings we're going to get. We can't get them in the junction that tall. How likely is it that we're going to get a whole bunch of really tall buildings in that little triangular shape? I don't think it would be. I don't think it's going to. There's the potential that we would, to the point where it would really mess up our view shed.
And I think we ought to go along that same thinking, is that commercial is very important to us as a city, but also we need to look at the appearance of our citizens coming into the city. But I recall a couple of years ago that we went around and around because we had a height restriction, and I don't see the value of a height restriction in this capacity. I don't think we're rushing to get something done here. I think we ought to have a program that is beneficial not only to the area but also to the city. So I don't think we need to hurry to come to a solution what we're looking at.
The question that I always ask myself is, unless there's a project that's coming forward that we can actually see, how do we know if it's even going to happen? And that's, since I've been on the council, that's happened multiple times, where someone has come in and asked for a zoning change or whatever they want, and we've been willing to give it, and then nothing happens, and then we're stuck with something we really aren't happy with. And that's what I feel about this is, everything is always, if we get the financing, if something comes along. And I am for commercial. I think that's really important, and I can see how that could be very valuable. But I am very cautious about the fact that we do some of these things and then nothing ever happens, and then we're stuck with what, whether it's a height restriction, whether it's the height limit, whatever we decide to do. And without having a viable project in front of us, how do we know what that's going to look like?
Right. And I think you bring up a good point, Susie. And to emphasize, this is just a plan. This is, a kind of a guideline. And if we, take out height restrictions and then say, later on we want, I think Gary Nelson brought up, make it so that you have some good guidelines, but don't make them so restrictive that you tie up any commercial that may come in that may be something really beneficial to the city.
But I guess I'm not comfortable just completely taking out the height restriction unless there's some sort of setback standard. And so I just think that we need to have a little bit more time to work through that and not just eliminate the height restriction without any other thought.
I agree. And I don't think that just taking them out is the right thing. I thought I've heard it multiple times tonight, is maybe softening that height restriction. If we can somehow soften it to make it a little more accessible for everyone, I think that would benefit us as a community and also those trying to develop and those trying to relocate.
But the other thing is the Planning Commission voted completely, all of them voted for this height restriction.
Well, and I believe Greg just mentioned that if you're not comfortable with it, it's fine. It's fine to take out. It's not.
Yeah. I guess my question is I'm sorry.
It's your
Mr. Montgomery, we've had this situation with other projects where we've tried to bring something forward, or we've had a study, and then we've been kind of rebuked because we can't build that there because it's not zone commercial. And we've seen that happen in the city when we start talking streetcar or transportation modes, and they'll say, oh, well, that's not viable because it's not zone commercial. Well, anything can be rezoned, and I don't think it's that big of an issue, is it? It takes time, but also if you're developing a plan, it takes a lot of time. And I don't think anybody is ready right now to dig in the dirt, are they? We have any plans before us that are actually saying this is what we propose to do?
There hasn't been anything submitted for a review or approval, no. In your conversations, I think maybe one of the things you might want to consider, as you've been discussing, you mentioned the concept and then softening it. And you may talk about the fact that just in this area, attention we pay to the architectural style, impacts, and that both on views and development. And maybe that is as far as it goes.
That's reasonable.
That becomes a guideline.
Right. I think you said it correctly. And this is not like a huge piece of property. It's pretty good size.
It's got some real limitations to it because you look at the UDOT slope easement and where they go to, you've got a very narrow piece right next to the road, and then it's not till you're back 200 or 300 feet that you.
So we're not talking, 50 developments or something that are going to come in that could be 100 feet tall. It is going to be restricted just by the size.
Yeah, the
and
shape
what
of
we
the
can put in there, and
parking
and everything else that goes along with it.
While you're here, the CBD zone does have restrictions on height and property lines. Can you remind us of what those are?
Actually, the CBD does not have a height limitation.
I thought in the CBDI
no.
There wasn't, but in the CBD it was.
No, neither one has a height limitation.
Okay. Is there a setback limitation?
No. They can build right to property line.
I just think we have more work to do on this.
So I guess,
compatible.
And I agree with you, Councilmember Stevens. So I guess I would just make a motion to table this and maybe work through some softening language.
I agree with that. I really feel that it's important that we do it right and that we don't make a mistake that is going to keep commercial from coming into downtown Ogden, on that corridor. But I do still really feel very strongly about the views too. And I think we have to take those into consideration.
One of the things that, if I might put this forward.
I'll second, I'm sorry.
So that's, we have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Van Hooser.
Discussion prior to the vote.
And
actually, Mr. Chair, the motion needs to have a date, and I'd be happy to share the possible dates. It sounds like you'll want a work session to discuss whatever options you look at. The next opportunity for that is on July 31st, which would mean the August 14th would be the earliest time you could table to. So it'd need to be at least August 14th or August 21st. Really depends on the extent of the proposed changes that you'll want to consider.
Well, okay, so I would just add August 14th to my motion.
I'll second it, so we're sure.
And further discussion?
I was just going to say, this has been tabled a number of times for a long time. And I suspect, what I'm sensing from public comment is that nothing's being, if there are projects that are lining up to do some things in this area, they're waiting to see what we do. They're not going to move forward until we decide, and I hate to postpone it a lot longer if there are projects ready to go.
I guess I would counter that by saying sometimes when there is a project, it makes the discussion more emotional.
True.
So any further discussion? We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier to table this to a date certain for August 14th. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Heyer?
No.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
Councilmember Van Hoosier?
Yes.
Councilmember Wicks?
Aye.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Vice Chair Blair?
Aye.
Chair Garner?
Aye. And with that, I would really, I know this is going to be a lot of work for our city people to really come up with this, but let's have some good, honest conversation about it, and we appreciate the feedback that we've received tonight, and let's see if we can get some areas developed to help this area move forward.
Mr. Chair, it'd be helpful if you could have some clarifying discussion about specific things you'd like to consider in the work session and in the ordinance.
So I'll start off and say, going off what Mr. Montgomery mentioned, a discussion about architectural style, possibly a setback, possibly landscape softening.
I think those are important to us, to have the setbacks considered.
And I think, Mr. Montgomery, also just the clarification with the UDOT part and the easements, and just so we have everything very clear, so when we do vote on this, that we say, this is exactly where we're at and what can be built here.
Can we also include something about the river? We've kind of left that open as far as the heights along the river banks and the shadow and how that would affect the river and the change that it would make in that whole ecosystem. And I hope that's an appropriate thing to add to this, so we're kind of...
I think we've done that in other areas, so we could really, truly talk about
really
that,
need to
like
talk
we've
about
done
that.
at the River Project and other things.
That's not really part of this plan, is it? I mean, that would be more the CBD.
For the future CBD?
Just for future development.
Yeah.
Okay.
But put that on your list.
Any further comments, clarification? We'll open that up in a minute, Thane, for public input after this, so hold on just a sec. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just move quickly. We'll move to the next thing on the agenda, and then we'll get to you in just a moment. Next is Mr. Montgomery with the news rack placement on public property.
Mr. Chair and members of the council, the Plan Commission has forwarded to you a recommendation regarding proposed ordinance for news racks in the right-of-way. And just use this photo to kind of introduce it, because as you're aware, one of the key things of a downtown is being able to have periodicals, newspapers for sale, and it's traditionally found along the streets. And so that tradition, which here was on the, I just went blank on the building. The Crescent, not the Crescent Plaza, but the next one down, where Kier owns. What hotel was that? Anyway, that's where this picture's at. I just went blank on it. But anyway, As we talk about the issue of news racks, there's two important principles. First is the publisher's right to freedom of speech and the distribution of that on public property. And so the Constitution is very clear of those rights, and courts have upheld that. But they've also said that cities have an obligation and have responsibility to make sure that on their public property, things are done in such a way that it is safe and aesthetics and other things can be considered, and they commonly refer to that as time, place, and manner. And so as we look at a news rack ordinance, it is balancing that First Amendment right with the right the city has of the use of their property. And so the ordinance we're talking about tonight tries to look at that. Well, why news racks? Well, first of all, as we've seen them develop in the city, they generally locate on places of high public concentration. Bus stops, entrances to major buildings, whether that's public or private. Also, periodicals come through the mail. You have home delivery of newspaper. And so you have three ways that they're distributed to the public. The concerns we have is what has happened in the downtown area. Several years ago when we did the CBD plan, we talked about the importance of creating a positive environment for living, working, and professional services. The city's invested a lot of money in the infrastructure that takes place along the sidewalk: street trees, tree grates, street lights, trash receptacles, bike racks, all having type of a unified theme to create an identity for the downtown. But what happens is, where we have no regulation at the present time, you see what takes place. There is no one to respond to. There's no requirement. And so we've had a lot of things like this take place in the downtown area that kind of takes away from the investment we've made as the public in the infrastructure of the urban setting. And so the question is, how do you create a balance? Another concern is that those who have placed these seems to have a lack of maintenance. They're not taking care of them. As these pictures show, graffiti gets left there. There's situations where because they are on the public way, they can be placed right next to businesses. Well, the businesses also have a right to have outdoor displays, but these news racks go in front of those businesses and then limit what the businesses can do. And even the appearance then can distract from the storefront of the business owner. But because they don't own these things, they can't do much about it. Because the news racks have a right to be there. So again, balancing those things out is important. Also, because there's really no one to respond to, there's a lack of maintenance around these facilities. And sometimes they're just left there and used for other things. The one on your left is advertising a lost puppy, and then as you look inside, it's a garbage can. Oh, there's beer bottles, papers. It doesn't have a periodical in it. All it has is garbage. And so they're not even being kept up for their intended purpose. We took a look as we looked at this ordinance and reviewed it, the existing conditions. The number of news racks downtown, again, we're looking at areas of concentration, so you'd expect them to be downtown. There's 70, or when we did this study, there were 70 news racks downtown, 29 outside of the CBD. In those downtown locations, you can see the mix of lower 25th Street, upper 25th Street, Washington, and other locations. Upper 25th Street and Washington Boulevard being the largest concentration in the downtown area. And then the mixture of what are those news racks servicing? Newspapers, tabloids, advertisements. Those are the three major categories of the things that are found in these machines. They're dispensed in different types of machines. One's called a gang box, where you can have 7 or 8 or 9 different printed material distributed in one location. Sometimes you have individual groupings where there's a cluster. Each one has its own container. Each is a different periodical, and they're just grouped together. Or you just have an individual that stands alone. Those are the ways that generally are dispersed. In the proposed ordinance, we talk about the fact that We want to make sure that the sidewalk is used for the movement of the people, that it portrays a positive public image, and because it is in the public realm, that there's regulations to it. We talk about protecting people from inappropriate material, and that uncontrolled placement results in potential problems both in the use of the sidewalk and the investments that are made in the buildings that they're next to, and that inappropriate locations can create an annoyance and a hazard sometimes. So with that, then the ordinance talks about some important features. First of all, it talks that outside the CBD, there would be no additional racks out in the right-of-way. Now again, this ordinance does not regulate any of these being located on private property. So, for example, the front of a grocery store, where you walk in and they're right by the side of the front, they're not regulated by this ordinance. This is only what's taking place on the public property, the sidewalk area, the right-of-way. It allows additional dispensaries to take place in the CBD. It exempts the streets on Weber State, for example, Evelson, which is a city street, but it's contained inside Weber State. And so it exempts that from these regulations because that is a state facility. And again, it doesn't regulate what's on private property. What it does do is propose a yearly registration fee of $5 per box or $15 for a multiple box that is paid each year. This helps us know whose boxes are where and who to contact if there are problems with that. We are setting up a liability insurance that the city has held harmless because of these things are in the public right-of-way. If someone gets hurt by one of these, there needs to be insurance to help cover that. The ordinance also talks about bonding for removal of these if they have to take place. And there's a tier structure of $600, $1,000, and $1,500 set up for the number of machines a publisher may have. So if they've got 1 to 4, there was a $600 fee. 4 to 7, I think, was $1,000, and more than that was $1,500. And the reason for that was to cover the cost that if these things are removed and the public property underneath it is damaged, who's going to repair that? This ensures that it can be repaired because their bond guarantees repair for maybe the damage they caused as they installed their thing and then removed it. And that was the reason behind that. Now, I know you received a letter concerned about the amount of that, and that can be a point of discussion today, but that's the reason why we talk about bonding for these machines, that as they anchor them into the sidewalk and then have to remove that, generally, once they've drilled in, you're going to split the sidewalk, different things happen, you need to replace that section of sidewalk when they're removed, and that's what the bond guarantees, is that replacement. The proposed ordinance looks at limiting the number per block. This is a situation that we have found on Upper 25th Street on the left, those red dots being the number of machines and locations. The proposal creates a dispersion on a block of no more than 6 on a block face, so that there's more of an even distribution. It also sets then limits on number of machines on a block, number of machines on the side, street side. You can have multiple boxes, but they count as 3 singles. So when you have that 6 total, one multiple box is half of that, which could happen. But in reality, you're allowing 8 or 9 or 10 different publications to be in that machine. So it really is an advantage to concentrate and take advantage of that. It sets spacing between the different machines so that, again, it's just not all up and down. There's some relief, because as a person walks the street, you can only buy one newspaper one time on that block. There's not a need to have 5 of them on that block to pick up. And so it sets some groupings. What does that limit mean? Well, it means that on Washington Boulevard, 1 machine would need to be eliminated. Now, you notice in the next 2, there's a kind of a mustard color number. Back when we started this ordinance, that was our analysis of how many would need to be removed if you follow these guidelines. Today, however, many of these machines have already been eliminated, have been taken out. So where we had between 25th Street, between Lincoln and Grand, we said 12 would need to be done. There's only 1 now that is above the limit of 6. So there's only 7 now in that area, where before there was 18. On south side between Grant and Washington, none need to be eliminated now, where the 6 would have needed to be eliminated when we started the review of this ordinance. So there's already been some policing with this since we started this, that some people have removed theirs because they weren't doing anything anyway. They were mainly vacant all the time.
Was there any pressure to remove them, or
no?
They just went away on their own?
I think part of it is the call. Calls have been made about this ordinance being proposed, and them looking at it saying, "Well, we're not using them anyway. Why keep them there?"
We don't want them to.
I don't know what happened. Maybe some have walked off and someone's in someone's living room. I don't know where they all went to, but
seems strange.
They're gone. We also talk about then limiting numbers in groups. That a group would be no more than 3 individual machines, and they're spaced at 2 feet. And then, again, we talk about in that grouping what the revisions may need to take place. We also talk about that there be no more than 2 of the same publication on any one block face and 4 on a block. Again, as we looked at this, only on 25th Street between Lincoln and Grant would the City Weekly need to remove 1 machine because it doesn't fit that criteria. Earlier on, the Inn was also one, but they're gone, and so that no longer applies. Then we talked about where the machines would be located. We talked about 2 possible places. One is that area where, if you will, all the public improvements happen, the street trees, the street lights, that 5-foot area from curb. So from the curb, 2.5 feet, in order to allow car overhangs, and then 5 feet, which is where the tree grates and all that stop. So it gives you a clear walking surface. And also then, if a building owner gives permission, that they could also place a machine in that area next to the building. The reason the building owner permission is important is because the building owners are already allowed to display product outside in a 2-foot area outside their building. And so that's, if you will, right of first refusal. If the property owner doesn't want to do that display, then he could decide to let that machine be there. But if he wants that for the display, he should have that right, first of all, to do that and not have it encumbered by a machine. Then we talk about 5 feet of clearance from other fixtures. So again, they can be serviced, whether it be the tree grates, the street lights. And then to leave a clear path of at least 7 feet if the walk is wider than 12 feet, and 4 feet if the walk is less than 12 feet. So again, we make sure the pedestrians have a means of access on the sidewalk.
I would imagine that this would assist in also snow removal if we ever had to do that.
Yeah, that also helps there. Then the ordinance talks about limiting the size of the machines, the color, the material, they'll be metal and weatherproof, and that those machines be maintained. Now, there was one item I know you received a concern about, and that was I think it was bronze brown. That is still brown, yeah. So we don't see that as being a different color. So that would still fit into that category of black, brown, or almond. The ordinance also talks about then keeping those machines maintained and free from graffiti. That becomes something that we establish, that if there's a problem, we notify them. They have a certain time to respond to take care of the problem, so that, again, the streetscape looks fresh and clean and not have these things detract from the overall appearance. Also, we talk about the proper way to anchor them, not to tie them to trees or lampposts or bike racks, but they need to be freestanding, anchored to the concrete. If they're out in the park strip area, that they have a concrete pad they sit on, rather than just in the grass or the dirt. To, again, secure them so they don't. We've seen times in strong winds that these plastic ones get blown away, come out into the curb line, and that creates problems. So it's to secure them so that people don't get injured by them. And we've seen some that have been just laying down, and for some reason just sit there for 2 or 3 days laying down as a tripping hazard. What the ordinance also proposes is then a transitional filing time. And this gives the person a time to see if they really want to keep the machines in the public right-of-way. After that time, then they need to file for the business license or for the vendor license by October 31st if outside the CBD, and then have those racks come into compliance also during that time. And then the design, in terms of spacing, then the actual design of being a metal box and the colors has to come into compliance by December 31st, giving them a staggered time frame, first of all, to locate in the proper locations and then work on getting the proper type of box for the printed material.
Are a lot of the purveyors of the newspapers and magazines going to need to buy new boxes? Or it looks to me like most of them would fit.
Yeah.
I noticed, walking down 25th Street the other day that a lot of them would
meet it
already.
Yeah, it's kind of split half and half. The plastic ones, of course, wouldn't meet it, but a lot of the metal ones do. So the other provision that's in here is it allows for two types of removal: non-emergency removal for lack of maintenance, and that is where there's a problem. We notify the owner. We set a time frame. They don't respond to that. Then we could remove the machine. The other is emergency, where there's immediate physical threat that either access to a building because maybe there's a fire going on, the fire department can't get there, they just take the machine and move it. Those emergency types. And then another one is if there's the material inside the machine is deemed explicit, erotic, or sexual, that can be confiscated at that point. And there's not a time frame, it's just taken. And then they can have time to come back and retrieve it or ask for a hearing, and then it could be reinstated if it's found not to meet these categories. But those two types of removals are put in the ordinance. Also unauthorized removals, unauthorized news racks. If they don't have the license, they don't have the permit to be there, that the city can then take them also because they haven't gone through that process. And then they, again, go through a process to try to get it back and to then find the right location to put it in or to get a license for it. That is the proposed ordinance regarding news racks. Any questions you have of me?
One of the letters we received was on the bond. Mm-hmm. And we talked about that a little bit. And I just want to get your input on this so that the public hears this too. But in some of in the tier factor, we've talked about each multi-box news rack shall count as 3 single-box news racks.
Correct.
So if we do some calculation with this tiering, it should be, with 3 in mind. So if it's like 1 to 6 or 1 to 9, or so that it correlates with the multi-box news rack. I think I'm correct in saying that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So just jumping in on that, I know we had some discussion right now. The proposal has 3 tiers and maybe making it a little more user-friendly for the high-end users, cutting that down to 2 tiers and lowering that so that there's just not that top amount, just the $1,000 for the second tier.
And that's definitely within the realm. Again, the reason for the bond was to try to make sure that if they're anchored and then removed and left the bolts in, or the bolts have broken the concrete, that public infrastructure needs to be replaced. And it guarantees that. We figured somewhere around $500 to replace a square of concrete, given the paving patterns that we have downtown. And so while the 1 to 6, if that becomes the first tier, we have at $600, that's just to say, okay, with the 1 or 2 machines, the chances are one of them is going to get damaged, so you'll be able to replace it. The larger number, when you get more than 6 machines, most likely not everyone's going to be broken, so the $1,000, if that'd be the cap, would cover all those machines, because the chances are every single location won't be damaged, but it just guarantees there's a way to fix that public infrastructure if it's damaged.
With the added caveat that, they don't get their license renewed if they...
That is another provision that's in there, that if there are problems, that they could revoke the license too.
Further questions? Thank you. Further discussion from council members?
Public input.
And we'll now take public input on the news rack. This is Brierly.
Carolyn Brierly, Ogden City Special Events. I just wanted to make one comment. Craig said he didn't understand why these racks had disappeared, and I just wanted to let you know that a business owner, member of the H25 Association, got very upset when every single one of them got tagged in one day. And she fervently got on the phone and called every owner and threatened them. So several of them disappeared. So kind of self-policing down there. I don't know how legal it was, but just thought I'd let you know.
Thank you. Any further public comment around the news racks?
Yes. Vaughn Jacobs with Standard Examiner. I'm the one who is noted in the September meeting notes as having worked with Mr. Montgomery and the Planning Commission for some time. I think when Greg and I looked back, we'd been talking about this for some 2 years. And I wanted to make mention of that because working with Greg has been professional, if not pleasant. So kudos to him and the Planning Commission. That's a rarity in some people's eyes, but that's been our experience. The Standard Examiner, we do recognize the need and the responsible action of the Planning Commission and the City Council. That said, having worked on it, addressed it informally for a couple of years, more formally since September, and as nature would have it, there's always something to tinker with along the way. I leaned over and mentioned to Greg, I do have a friendly amendment. If you'll turn to page 9 of the proposed ordinance, it's on the design, and minor as it might be, we would request a friendly amendment on the height and the depth restrictions with a very simple phrase. Currently it reads, proposed all permitted news racks shall comply with the following design standards. A, height 50 inches, multiple racks 58, depth of 24 inches. We'd ask that the line without review and approval of the Planning Commission be added to that. Mr. Montgomery and his staff have been very fastidious in researching racks and current professionally manufactured metal racks. The highest rack that is currently manufactured professionally is 49 inches. If that rack was put on a 3-inch tall concrete base that you saw pictured by Mr. Montgomery, we would be out of compliance with the ordinance. Therefore, we're asking for a simple modification to the ordinance to address specific needs, once again in compliance with Mr. Montgomery and his staff. And given that, we would believe that this to be fair and reasonable from our position. Any questions I can answer? Thank you.
Thank you. Further comment from the public? Public input? Okay, comment from council staff.
Mr. Chair, I think it would be appropriate to have Mr. Montgomery respond to the proposed friendly amendment.
Probably so we just add the 3 inches and not have the Planning Commission involved in it to keep it a simple process. Or else maybe even give it another 5 inches total, just leeway to be safe and not.
Or just say the actual height of the box itself.
Well, those are the machine heights, and I'm just thinking just maybe a little leeway then, so just add a couple inches so it's not.
Sure. So you were saying that maybe it's 53
maybe
or 54?
It's 50, maybe 54 and
62.
Yeah, I mean, something like that.
It's amazing.
And that's on the height and the depth, just acceptable, and then the width, probably just leave it the same too, 24 inches and 72. So primarily just the height, look at 54 inches and 62 inches. Okay. So that's 7, 17, 18A, 1 and 2.
It's amazing that we're discussing heights again, huh?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Okay. Input from council members. Further discussion?
If there's no further discussion, I'll take a stab at this, but I might need some help. I would recommend that we approve Ordinance 2012-41 with added language that we have 2 bond tiers, 1 through 6, and 7 and higher, with the 7 and higher being $1,000. And then also a friendly amendment, which changes the height of the the cement and the box to from 54 to 62 inches. Is that clear enough?
I think we ought to just go 55, Caitlin.
Well, I'm going off of what their discussion was.
54 and 62, yeah.
And I would second that motion.
We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Vice Chair Blair to adopt proposed ordinance 2012-4D1, with these 2 amendments.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chair, the first tier wasn't mentioned the price. That would be $600, what it currently is? So
correct, yes.
Okay.
So the tier would be 1 to 6 is $600 and 7 or more at $1,000. And the friendly amendment would be height at 54 inches and 58 inches. Or excuse me, 54 inches and 62 inches. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember Van Hoosier?
Aye.
Councilmember Wicks?
Aye.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Vice Chair Blair?
Aye.
Chair Garner?
Aye. And thank you for your work on this. We appreciate it very much. Okay, next on the agenda is reports from administration. Mr. Johnson.
We have Laurie Johnson here to make her first presentation to you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's good to be here and on a fairly simple topic that shouldn't take very long. Here to request adoption of a resolution 2012-19. Basically, the Council and Mayor accepting the certified tax rate as it been calculated by the state based on the county's valuations. And that rate is 0.002714 for the general purpose rate and 0.000784 for the GO bond, as a total rate 0.003498. As you notice, that rate does go up a little bit from the previous year, and that is due to the new growth that has been experienced in the city, and also a 2.5% depreciation in real property and just under 8% depreciation in personal property from the previous year. So as you notice, if we're getting the same revenues as has been explained in your packet, however, if there's appreciation, the rate will go down. If there's depreciation, the rate will go up in order to capture that revenue. So some people will experience a different rate, some values, and the rates won't be consistent exactly across the city. Some areas will have different levels of depreciation experienced. Also to note, there are only 2 other entities in Weber County that will be holding truth in taxation, which means that they will be increasing property taxes, but none of those are other cities in Weber County. It's the Weber School District and the North Davis Sewer District that will be holding truth in taxation and actually raising property taxes within Weber County. So it looks pretty good for an Ogden citizen on this particular year as far as property taxes. Are there any questions on this rate or how it's calculated or what the purpose would be? We'll basically just certify the rate to the state so that those taxes can be collected accordingly throughout the year. And also of note, the current budget year, those property taxes have been collected in accordance with the budget that has been set. They have been collected in full.
Thank you.
No.
Any further questions for Laurie?
Thank you.
Further discussion from council members?
I'll make a motion that we adopt proposed resolution 2012-19.
Second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Wicks and a second from Vice Chair Blair to adopt the certified tax rate proposed resolution 2012-19. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Van Hoosier?
Aye.
Councilmember Wicks?
Aye.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Vice Chair Blair?
Aye.
Chair Garner?
Aye. This passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the cancellation of a meeting and consideration of the cancellation of the November 6, 2012 meeting, the day of the general elections.
Chair Garner, I would make a motion that we cancel the November 6, 2012 meeting.
I second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Wicks and a second from Councilmember Stevens to cancel the meeting on November 6, 2012. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? This passes. Thank you. Next is public comments. This is an opportunity to address the council regarding your concerns or ideas. Please state your name for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes. In this form of government, all city personnel are the responsibility of the administration, not of the council. Please discuss any concerns you may have regarding the staff with the mayor, chief administrative officer, or department directors. Sure.
My name is Thane Fisher, and I would humbly ask, since there was 2 options for dates on that extension, which was the 14th and the 21st. I will be traveling and won't be back until, I would not be able to make the 14th meeting. And since the height restriction is pretty much 100% on our property only, I would like to be here for that meeting. So I don't know if there is a way, I know it's probably unorthodox, to reconsider, since there was 2 dates mentioned, that the 21st would be one that it would be extended to versus the 14th. I tried to get up fast enough, but unfortunately, I don't move that quick.
Mr. Chair, actually, you can reconsider any action in the meeting or in the next 2 meetings. So if you so choose, you could change that date.
Well, I'll make the motion to change the date.
I'll second it.
To
August 21st.
August 21st, 2012.
Thank you. Well.
And so we have a motion from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier to change this date to look at the or to look at the 21st Street corridor to August 21st. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any further public comments? Comments from administration?
I have 2 quick things. I'd like to, again, publicly thank Jay and Justin for the work they did on the river project and getting awarded that Calvin Sudweeks Award. That's very prestigious, and we're really proud of that. That's a great thing. I also want to publicly thank our police and fire. They collaborated a great deal over what was a very, very scary 4th of July weekend with the extreme fire danger we had. We talked about that in department director meeting today, and they really came together in a unique way to avert what could have been some potential disasters. So I'd be remiss if I didn't publicly thank them and recognize their efforts over a real intense week. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Council staff.
Yeah, I'd like to personally thank the fire department. I'm sorry.
Hold on. Council staff.
Thank you. Just a reminder for public that the council will not be meeting the next 2 weeks. The next meeting is July 31st. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, council members.
No, I think the efforts of the fire department were extraordinary on the Ogden Canyon fire last week, and the fact that we didn't have anything more serious, it was serious enough to begin with, but the fact that everybody was so careful, and I just hope that we continue to be aware of the fire danger in Ogden, and not only the foothills, but just here in the city in general.
Other comments?
I would echo that. I think we've got some heroes in our community, and those are both the firemen and our police department. I went up and visit with the homeowners along that ridge, and they actually saved the homes up there, and it could have been a lot worse. took out a couple of fences there, and it is probably a disaster for some of those individuals there, but the citizens in that area are very appreciative of the effort that our firefighters and our police did. And I noticed that there were some firemen from South Ogden was involved with that, so it was a combined effort of an effort, and the fire moved very quickly from the mouth of the canyon to the ridge there, and so they are the heroes of our community at this time.
I think they're superheroes.
I do too.
I know somebody in the area, and I'm considering the fire danger and how fast they got that out, and that there was not more damage or, you know, threats to life or more threats to property. It's really amazing what they were able to do.
Great guys. Also, I'd like to recognize and thank everyone who helped with the Cowboy Museum event we had down at the Union Station, especially Councilmember Van Hoosier. He did a fantastic job with that. And we'd also like to recognize one of our own, Doug Stevens. Doug entered some artwork under Novice and took one of the awards, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Good job. And also encourage our city to participate in all the events over the next 2 weeks. It's going to be busy in the community. We've got a lot of fun activities planned for the rodeo and events, and a lot of good things happening in the city. So, and the parade and rodeo, I think I mentioned, and just lots of fun activities. So farmers market is opening up, and come and join us and have fun in Ogden.
Mr. Chair, if they look around the city, we've got a lot of those painted horses around, and they're quite interesting to look at.
They're back out on the streets. Okay, thank you. Next is motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Heyer and a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier to adjourn the city council meeting. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. This is also a reminder that we'll have a work session and to receive the mayor's presentation and other items. Thank you.